I struggled with cars. You're struggling with cars. It seems like we're all frustrated with the idea that some 16th century painting is going to be the last step between us and medical school. I've been there and I've beaten cars. I know how hard it can be, and that's why I'm here to help you do the same. What's up everyone, my name's Justin. This summer I wrote the MCAT and I was able to score a 523 with a 130 in cars after writing the MCAT 2 years ago and getting only a 124. The first time I wrote the MCAT, it seemed like there was nothing I could do to increase my car score as someone who didn't grow up reading books for fun, not having that innate reading ability, and not having a lot of interest or general knowledge in a lot of the topics that were tested on cars. This time around, I changed my mindset, tried new strategies, and practiced even more and was able to finally beat cars. And I hope that by sharing my experience with others, I can help you do the same. But remember, the best strategies are the ones that actually work best for you. So listen for some inspiration and try some strategies out to see what works best for you. So briefly, what even is CARS? Well, the Critical Analysis and Reasoning section, or CARS section of the MCAT, is made up of 9 passages or mini essays on topics in the humanities and social sciences. So topics such as art, history, religion, economics, psychology, and so on. Each passage has around 5 to 7 questions that test your reading comprehension, your ability to understand the author's message, and apply that information to new situations presented. You're only given 90 minutes for this entire section, which corresponds to about 10 minutes per passage, and although the timing can be really challenging, I would first recommend focusing on accuracy even if it takes longer to complete the passage. Then, once you become more accurate and comfortable, you can try to work your time down. But what makes CARS so difficult? There's many reasons why students such as myself often struggle with CARS. Many students come from a science background where they don't practice their reading comprehension skills as much, which can make it really hard to interpret and understand these passages, which are often written with very obscure vocabulary and are very dense. Second, let's be honest, the CARS passages are pretty boring to read, and they're often in areas that you may not have a lot of background information or interest at all in. For example, as a Canadian, I struggled with some of the passages on American history. Finally, CARS is a huge mental game. If you get too frustrated or anxious while reading the passages, you're going to have a hard time focusing and being able to answer the questions. I also recommend you take some time to reflect on why you're struggling with CARS so you can tailor strategies specific to your own needs. Now that we know some of the reasons why students may struggle with CARS, we can develop strategies to improve. And to stay organized, I will split the strategies into 3 main areas. First, being comprehending the passage. Second, being answering the questions. And third, being your mindset. Let's start with reading comprehension, the area that I struggled with most while tackling CARS. Your overall goal while reading is to be able to efficiently understand the author's main idea, their arguments, and what they were trying to get at in the passage. Doing this may take a lot of practice depending on how comfortable you are with reading passages, especially the ones in the nature of CARS, but it is possible to improve. I always chose to read the passage before reading the questions, as I found that reading the questions first often skewed what I was looking for and made me miss the main idea. As I mentioned, improving the skill will take a lot of practice, but how can we practice? Well, the best questions available are from the AAMC directly. However, I would suggest doing more than just that in order to improve. There are many practice CARS passages that you can find online, and while I will say that the questions they provide are not necessarily super representative of the actual MCAT, the passages themselves I found were really great in that they were super boring to read, super difficult to comprehend, exactly what you should be looking for in CARS practice, especially in the reading comprehension phase. Let's start with a hypothetical example of how I would approach a passage. Let's say paragraph 1 introduces a female author who did not get a lot of recognition due to sexism in that time period. So automatically, I read that first paragraph and in my head I go, okay, female author that didn't get a lot of recognition due to being female. Then you might read the next paragraph and add to that storyline and say, okay, there were a lot of other female authors in that time period that also did not get recognition. The next paragraph might show why the passage author thinks that those authors wrote really great novels, so keep that in mind. In the next paragraph, you might be able to add the passage author's opinion by saying something like, well, the author thinks that this was wrong, female authors should have got recognition. And in the final paragraph, you might be able to summarize that the author thinks we should care about this issue now because of existing sexism. So after reading, you can conclude a main idea somewhere along the lines of, There were many great female authors that did not get recognition due to being female. This is unfair and we should be aware of this issue now. On the real test, you don't have to actually write anything down if that's wasting too much time. But I personally found that creating this storyline while reading the passage helped me stay engaged, which is crucial to cars. I would not recommend skimming the passage like you might do in the other sections of the MCAT, because on cars, you'll probably lose the main idea and you won't be able to answer the questions as well. I personally spent 4, 5, or even 5.5, maybe 6 minutes reading the passage really in depth. That helped me understand what was going on and made a lot of the questions really simple, to be honest. That being said, let's move on to how to tackle the questions. And as I mentioned, I found that if I really understood what was going on in a passage, the questions, most of them were not too difficult at the end of the day. So sticking with our last hypothetical example, if there was a question that asked, which of the following policies would the author most likely favor? In my head, automatically I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna look for something where female authors are more represented, or we can highlight their work or ensure that they're not limited in any way. Then I can look through the answer options and the right one will probably stick out to you. If there's a question asking, why does the passage author think that this female author is so strong? Automatically I'm going to be zoning in on that paragraph where they talked about this and keeping only that in mind. Why did the passage author think that this author was so strong? If I know that and I comprehended that, I just look through the options and find which one matches. I also have a few other tips on how to answer the questions. What I would recommend is reading the question slowly and sort of translating it in your head to get at what is this question actually asking me. Then I would just go through each of the options and ask yourself, is this what the passage said? And I know that might seem silly and too simple, but to be honest, it really helped me a lot to just go through the options and just ask myself, is this what the passage said? You'll start to notice some of the trick answer options where you might say to yourself, well, this could be true, but the passage author never really said this, or this is actually the opposite of what the passage author was saying, or the more difficult ones where you see something and you say to yourself, well, the passage sort of alludes to this, but maybe there's a better option. Maybe there's an answer that directly answers what the question is asking. In general, it's not usually a good idea to pick the most extreme answer option, so the ones that say always or never. And if it is one of those answers, it's going to be super obvious. The passage author is just going to keep hammering that point over and over. Their tone is going to be super strong, but if you don't notice that language, I would hesitate with picking those answers. Also, a simple mental trick that I used was telling myself, okay, the answer to this question is somewhere in this passage. And that made me feel a lot better. You know, sometimes I could find 1 or 2 sentences that directly answered one of the options, and then I wouldn't even try to justify the other ones. It can be very easy to try to justify another answer option that sort of seems right, but if you find one that's definitely right, just pick that one and move on. I also tried to bank time on some of the easier questions that I could answer in maybe 10 or 15 seconds, which helped me save time to read the passage and tackle the harder questions. As I mentioned, practice is absolutely key to improving on cars. I mentioned a free resource in Jack Weston, a paid resource in UWorld, but I will say that the questions are a little bit off, so I wouldn't worry too much about the percentages you're getting. The ones that you should really focus your time and effort on are the official AMC practice cars questions. I highly recommend doing all of these practice questions and trying out some of the strategies you've developed. It's also very important that you review these questions so you can understand exactly why you're getting questions wrong, why you're getting questions right, what's working and what's not. Did you miss the main idea? Did you pick something that could be true but the author never said it? Were you stuck on a 50-50? Did you pick the opposite answer? Or were you just completely lost? And understanding the specific reason why you got questions wrong is crucial to developing new strategies to making sure you don't make the same mistake again. Now onto your mindset, which is actually much more important than you may initially think. It's absolutely crucial that you stay fully locked in and invested while reading the passages. Otherwise, you may miss the main idea, you may misinterpret the author's messages, or miss their arguments altogether. I know how boring the passages can be. I know how easy it is to zone out. Trust me, I've done it countless times, but you've got to find some way to stay locked in. Maybe you're imagining that the passage author is your dream date and you need to listen to what they're saying to impress them. Maybe you imagine describing this passage to your friends, so you need to know what's going on. Or maybe you just try to do this out of spite and you say, you know what, I'm not gonna let this cars passage get in the way. I'm just gonna read it. I'm gonna own it. I'm gonna understand what's going on. It's also gonna be super difficult to tackle cars if you're too anxious, too stressed, too frustrated. And I know cars is super important, cars is super stressful, and I get that. But at some point, being overly stressed is just going to be counterproductive to your success. If one passage is super hard, just let it be hard. Don't let it get in your head. You can get a 2 out of 6 on the first passage and then a 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6 on the rest and still get a really great score. But if you let that first 2 out of 6 affect the rest of your test, that's when things will start to spiral. In between each of the passages, I always try to take around a 5-second break where I just close my eyes, take a deep breath, and clear my mind for the next passage. At the end of the day, cars is just one more step in between you and becoming a doctor, and you're not gonna let this section on this test stop you in your way. Have some confidence, you can beat this. The first time I wrote the MCAT, I was so stressed about cars, I was so down on myself. The second time I wrote it, I said, you know what, I'm done with that stress. I'm gonna beat this, I know I can. Every night before I went to bed, I'd picture that top score and picture how good it would feel to get that score. Well, that's the end of the video. I hope my tips could help you out even a little bit. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask in the comments and feel free to suggest any future video ideas. Good luck with studying.